Welcome. Thank you so much for coming. My name's EJ, and I'm going to be introducing Robyn Appleton from the Spectacled Bear Conservation Society. Robyn's from Canada, where she's currently doing a PhD on spectacled bear ecology. But she spends most of her time in Peru because she's the co-founder of the Spectacled Bear Conservation Society, and I'm thrilled to hear what she has to say. Thank you.
Thank you, EJ. It's nice to see everyone, so many familiar faces, and as always, I'm always happy to talk about spectacled bears. Today I'll also be on stage with Frances Aurich. She has been involved in our project for the past 10 years. She is now one of the WCN scholars, and when she actually received the scholarship, she didn't speak a word of English, so this is a pretty big deal for her to be up on stage. Is there sound? Is it? Really? Okay, let me see if I can do my my bear interpretation. Oh, this wasn't supposed to be funny because that is actually the sound of a starving bear. So you can see here, this is the range of bears. They're from Venezuela down to Bolivia, but there could be less than 5,000 left in the world, and that population is steadily declining. And that's mainly due to the loss of habitat, due to fragmentation from agriculture, and just the explosion of people, as is happening all around the world, but particularly in Peru. And bears like this are dying of malnutrition, starvation, and disease. But I don't want to be too negative, and I want everyone to leave here feeling really optimistic and positive. It's not too late, and we can do a lot to help keep this bear alive and to give this little one a chance with your support here and everyone. But there are a number of reasons why bears are important. There are 8 bear species around the world and only 1 in South America. And while they are so incredibly cute, as you can see here, they're also keystone species, which means not that they have a key stuck in the middle of their body, but they're actually at the top of the food chain. So they play an incredibly important role in the ecosystem. They are also an umbrella species. They require huge amounts of land. And for all you cat lovers out there, by protecting bears, we're also protecting numerous cat species and other endemic species, endangered animals. So it's really important to work with bears. And this bear in particular, he's a funny one, but they require so much land. This bear walked 150 kilometers in 4 days in search of all of his girlfriends, and he has a lot of girlfriends, so you can see why. But this is some of their bear habitat, and that would be 1 male bear range. And so they require so much land. And so when we know we're maintaining a healthy bear population, we're doing so much for other bears. And that's why I really believe that working and protecting bears is critical for conservation. My love for bears started a long, long time ago. That's not a spectacled bear. I'm from Canada, so I grew up with grizzly bears and with black bears. And I did everything I possibly could to see them and sang, if anyone knows the song, "The Bear Went Over the Mountain," "The Bear Went Over the Mountain." But that reality came to an end when we were driving to the Rockies with my parents, and the car in front of us hit a black bear. And, I guess I can't even look at that photo, but we just realized that the impact that humans are having on bears was so big. And poor Auntie had to put her bear on a boat and send it to England, Paddington. And so I realized that that's what I wanted to do with my life. I wanted to work to protect this bear and ensure that it had a chance at life. Javier is the person I started this project with, and he was an incredible animal tracker. And as many of you know, we set out trying to find these bears in this incredible, dense, wet, yucky forest that was so hard to find bears. And we didn't find anything for the first 8 months, but we came across this dry area en route to another valley, and sure enough, this bear just came crawling down this big, huge cliff. And who would have ever thought that this is where you would find bears? But Laura, sure enough, popped out, and this was the very first bear we saw. And in fact, and hopefully there's sound, this is the very first footage we ever had of these bears. around. And SBC was formed, and thanks to Laura, we started our organization, and our logo is actually representative of Laura and her cub, and we believe that she represents the resilience and hope and the continuity for the species. So we began 10 years ago and started building our conservation center where we run education programs, and we have our head office. It's in northern Peru, for any of those that you've been to Peru. We're about 1,000 kilometers north of Lima, near the border of Ecuador. We work in a couple of areas, national parks, private community lands, indigenous, and also just private land. Something that's been hard to explain in the past, so hopefully this can help clarify, is that we work in a number of different ecosystems, and it's actually a gradient, an elevation gradient, which goes from dry forest to this incredibly dense cloud forest to this high alpine Páramo. The bears in the cloud forest are incredible cliff climbers. The bears in the cloud forest have very different behaviors. They sleep in trees and create nests. And the great thing about the dry forest is that we can actually see these bears, and this is something that's been really important also for the research that we do. The one thing that's challenging with the cloud forest, although this was a great day, probably one of the few days we had, half the time we can't even see our own feet. It's so cloudy and wet and cold. And then same with the Páramo, it's like walking through a marsh up to your waist. But one thing we did realize actually was these bears all act the same. Marco here thinks he's part of the royal family, dressed up with his crown. They definitely don't make life look hard, do they? But because of the environment they live in, they also take their exercise extremely serious. So push-ups, pull-ups, sit-ups. Marco. So we believe that the work that we're doing and to really protect these bears, it's a combination of factors. So community empowerment, habitat protection, and also research are key to ensure their survival. So looking at habitat protection, creating protected areas, private protected areas, and also helping national parks understand more about their area, the bears that are in there. Because we are facing a serious crisis with the loss of habitat and the speed in which it's happening. And as I mentioned earlier, these bears require huge amounts of land to survive and to maintain a healthy populations. And while this bear looks like he's just having a really bad day, he's having an extremely bad day. This was earlier this year. And he showed up one of the water holes, and he had some type of skin disease. And while that may not seem like a major problem, when you have inbred populations like this that are very small, they're very susceptible to something like a disease, and it could come through and wipe out the entire population. As you can see here, it's not big, but it's open to wounds, and flies lay their larvae. So he was coming to the water hole to try to reduce probably the itch and the pain. But we don't just see it within the bear population, we're also seeing it among other species, pumas, ocelot cats. The other problem with these small populations of bears and lack of connectivity is they're not able to reach the important food that they're required to maintain their weight throughout the winter. And that's really affecting the survival rate for the cubs, and mortality is incredibly high. So working with national parks is a really important part of what we do, extending and expanding those parks as well. So I just wanted to bring Frances up on stage to have her tell you a little bit more about protected areas.
Thanks, Robyn. Protected areas are very important for conservation. However, they face many challenges. One of them is they are underfunded, and the lack of knowledge, like they don't know how the bears live, what habitat they need. And this is very important because this is leading them to make bad decisions, and they don't understand the consequences on bears. Another challenge for protected areas is the presence of humans. They enter the park sometimes to get their wood. They also use the protected area to free range their cattle, and sometimes they burn the forest. Human pressure. We know that that's a big problem around the world. And here, the communities are expanding because they want to get a bigger area to grow their agricultural lands. So this is a large field of rice, and we can see in the back of the picture a protected area which seems like an island. So they are becoming increasingly isolated. So we use camera traps. The reason why we use camera traps because they act as our eyes in the field. They provide important information like the presence, how are the birds using the area. And the reason why we want to know that is we really need to know what is the impact of humans on bears. So my research is focused on how are the human and cattle impacting the bears and in a specific protected area called Lucky Pampa Wildlife Refuge. And also, specifically in this protected area, we knew that there were 500 cattle sharing the habitat with bears, so that was part of my question too. So far, our results are showing that bears are not sharing the habitat with cattle, even though the habitat the cattle are using is very important for bears. So the yellow circle shows where we found mainly cattle, and the green one when there are mainly bears. So here we can see that the poor bears are being pushed to the edge of the protected area without having access to main food. But maybe it's not only cattle. Maybe it's the presence of humans too, because as I said previously, they are also entering the park. And they enter the park to get their cattle out of there, and often they go with their dogs. So here we found that human presence has a much greater impact on bears than cattle. But human needs the protected area. They need to go there because they need to get the wood for their cooking. So that's what they use for their everyday life. And not only getting into the protected area, but just living around. That is enough to keep the bears away from there. And so the bears, they will let you know how they feel about your presence. And trust me, you don't want to make a bear mad. So, what is the solution for that? We know that working with park rangers and with the local community is very important. So we need to tell them about the bears, how are they using the habitat, so the human use of the protected area is according to what the bears' needs are. And also, we might need to work with the cattle too. So I know that that's important for them. We know and we respect that. But also, maybe they can come in the protected area when the bears are not there so we can avoid the conflict. And also, this is an example. This is a sapote fruit, and they are located in the lower parts. So we need to make sure that the bears are accessing to this important fruit because sapote are extremely important for the bears. They needed to build their fat to be ready for the winter time when food becomes less abundant. As well as we need to work to make sure that the bears can access to high elevation forest so they can eat the food that is there and some bromeliads. This picture shows the importance of the sapote fruit. This is what can happen with a bear within 4 months. That's why we really need to make sure they can access it. But this is not all enough. We found that protected areas are way too small, and they are not connected. So this can really maintain a healthy population of bears. So what can we do about that?
So we have a couple of options. They're fairly big options, but We are working with local Indigenous communities to create these private protected areas, and those will be projects that will be ongoing. But something that's new, and it came out in our strategic planning process in November, is that we really need to purchase some of these critical private land. And as you can see here in the pink, those are critical to connecting the green, which is the national park, and the white, which is a community private protected area that we've just almost completed. And so that is our new strategy to ensure that these bears have a large enough space to survive. Because ultimately what we want to see is that the bears can move about through all of these areas. Something else that came out in our strategic planning process in November was the community empowerment program that we're running. So we have seen a lot more conflict and retaliatory killings with bears in the last couple of years. As there's less and less habitat for these bears, they're raiding a lot of crops from people, and it's causing conflict within the community. So we're also working with these communities and providing these alternative livelihood programs. As part of one of our Forest Guardian programs, we work with children. We're doing environmental education, showing the kids how important it is to also treat domestic pets with respect. We feel that that's part of learning to love animals and learning to care for your environment. And also working with the adults in the communities and training them on other programs. But what has been a really standalone program is our Felty program. And I don't know if many of you have come to our table and seen our little felted ornaments, but it's not just a small artisan program that we're doing. These Indigenous people own all of that land. And so it doesn't matter if we had the last remaining bear on that area, the government could not step in. So you need to have these communities on side. And ultimately it comes down to them and whether or not they want to work with you and work to protect the land. And so they have some of the richest, highest biodiversity area in the world. This is part of the Amazon watershed. We located a new bear population in this region and other critically endangered species such as the mountain tapir. And I had to throw up a little baby mountain tapir if you don't know what they look like, but they're so cute. But we've also been going in with botanists, and within a day or two, they're finding new orchid species and so on. I mean, the diversity is incredible. It's a dense, beautiful forest, and within days, it can look like that. And we're under major threats from mining companies at the moment. So it's an easy solution. The more Felty we sell, basically, the more land we can protect. So after our presentation, feel free to come by our table. And if anybody has any ideas about where we can sell this, we're always open to that. And it goes so far beyond just conservation and wildlife. It's also changing the lives of many of these women, as you can see in the photo, just the smiling. They feel they have a purpose in life. They're part of something. They've been provided with a skill now that they can be so proud of. Not to mention that they're making these incredibly cute felted ornaments. I mean, they're really incredibly talented. But for many of these young women, their life was about reproducing, having children, and spending time in the house, and now they have so much more to live for. And that long term, that will also help with population control. But you can see the smiles on their face, and it's becoming part of our organization. And these girls they're so proud of what they've done, and they frame their certificates after their workshop, and they put it on their walls, and it's really a great process to see. But it's a hard program. This is my mom down on the left-hand corner. I'm sure some of you have seen her outside, but there is thousands and thousands of Felties here, and it takes a lot to manage this program. They're being shipped from Canada all around the world. Last year we made 15,000 products. We go to gift shows. We're trying to get more and more of our products into stores. So again, if anyone has any ideas. But it is such an easy thing to do. We continue to sell more and more and more. We have over 100 women that are now trained up and working in this program, selling 15,000 of those products a year. We've been able to protect well over thousands of acres of land through this program. And so if we can continue to expand that program, we'll continue to protect these bears. Research is also an important part in what we do. We work with one of the least known bear species in the world, and as we move up this watershed and going to these new areas, we have no idea where they are. And really, who's ever looking up in the cliffs like that? I mean, when we first saw these bears crossing that, I mean, I seriously thought I was having heat stroke or something. But the great thing about the dry forest is that you can see these bears. So we've been able to learn so much about them, their reproduction, how many cubs they have, how often they have them. But we've been installing hundreds of camera traps in these areas because they are the eyes in the forest when we're not there. Although the bears think they're used for rubbing and scratching and itchy. We needed to put some of the music, you know, when they show them dancing, if anyone's ever seen those dancing bears. But then they have enough, and then they become camera shy, and this guy's like, I don't want this camera here anymore. It's in my space. This is my private space. And this is one of BBC's cameras. We were filming Planet Earth with them, and they didn't believe us when we said we needed, like, rebar to wire this camera trap down. They're like, no, we've done this before. We're fine. Anyways, this was in a huge, massive cage, and then this is the view from the BBC camera. Like, look at that camera. So that was the first video footage we gave to BBC. We said, that's why we needed the rebar. We've been using drones as well, which has been an incredible tool to fly over some of these mountain ranges and find new habitat. And collaring has been something we've done in the past, but it helps us understand the range and the habitat that these bears need. And the great thing about these bears is they have individual markings, so they all have names, so we can continually monitor the bear population over time. So we've been monitoring this one population for 12 years now, which provides incredible information. And we can see where young bears like this are dispersing to as well, because we need to ensure that they have enough habitat to go to. So we really believe that to keep these little guys in the wild, it's important to focus on these 3 areas of our work. Because as I mentioned, it's the only way to combat this, and this is something we need to stop. This is only a few months ago. This is prime bear habitat, Chipotle, which Francis had mentioned. The people are just clearing it for cattle grazing, and the fires are just taking off, and they're running right across the entire flat area here. And this is actually our priority land that we're hoping to purchase in the next couple of months, depending on funding. But that's the Chipotle tree, and it's just, they're engulfed in flames, leaving this bear habitat. So this is a really, really important area. At the same time this was happening, this bear was just in a water hole, which is about half a kilometer away, not even realizing that his habitat that will keep him alive for the rest of the year is on fire. So again, we really are very motivated to do what we can to try to protect the last little remaining land here in the dry forest. There's probably less than 100 bears in this area, in the entire dry forest.